As I made the turnaround at the top of Columbine, something happened that has never happened in my life before. Welcome back to the channel. This video is fueled by the feed. So I'm just going to warn you right off the bat, this is going to be a little different than a typical Dylan Johnson race report video. Yes, there will still be tech talk, power numbers, and marginal gains, but there's also going to be a lot more feelings and introspection than you're used to on this channel. And that's because this was my first race back after being hit by a truck on a training ride this May. I'm not going to get too much into my build back from injury in this video, but I will probably save that for a future video when I'm actually fully healed and back to full fitness. But for the purposes of this video, this is what you need to know. Roughly 3 months before race day at Leadville, I was hit by a truck. This was particularly cruel timing because it was just 2 weeks out from the most important race of the year for me, which is the Unbound 200. The result was a fractured tibial plateau and fibula in my right leg. For those of you who didn't know about the accident, who were questioning why you never saw an Unbound video, this is the reason. I spent the day of Unbound on the couch instead of at the race. 1 month after the accident, I was able to pedal a bike for the first time, albeit very easy and for a very short amount of time. And then 2 months after the accident, I was able to train without pain or excessive swelling in my knee, which left me about a month of training before Leadville. By race day, the bone was pretty much healed and I only had minor swelling. I could go into a lot more detail, and like I said, I probably will in the future, but the point I'm trying to get at is that I was not in good shape for this race. This is not an excuse I ever like to use. In fact, I don't think I have ever once in my life said I'm not in shape on the starting line of a bike race. I pride myself on being well prepared for bike races, which is probably apparent if you watch this channel by how much thought I put into the equipment for these various races. But I would say that applies equally, if not more so, to my physical conditioning. I simply don't show up to races wishing I had trained more. In fact, if anything, sometimes I show up to races having trained too much, but that's besides the point. It just turns out that this time around, I didn't have a choice. Okay, settle down there, buddy. You're not better than the rest of us just because you trained your ass off just to get 17th again. You may be asking, Dylan, why not just wait until you're actually fully healed and back in good shape to start racing again? And normally I would, but it is still a goal of mine to finish the Lifetime Grand Prix this year, even if my chances of a high placing are completely shot at this point. My chances of making it back into the Grand Prix next year are almost certainly in jeopardy right now, and quitting the series at this point because I won't place well will definitely not help. Seeing as you only get one drop race for the season and I was forced to miss Unbound, Leadville was a must. I'm going to guess that if you're watching this video, you have some idea of what Leadville is, but just in case you've been living under a rock or, you have a life and you don't follow American gravel racing, which is much more likely, here's a brief overview. Leadville is a 100-mile mountain bike race, and I use the term mountain bike loosely here because it's more of a dirt road race done on mountain bikes at an altitude of 3,200 to 3,800 meters or 10,000 to 12,000 feet. The altitude is what makes Leadville iconic. It is extremely hard to perform well this high up with massive drops in power, and it presents all kinds of new problems that might be different than what you're used to at sea level, like acclimation, pacing, and race nutrition. And if that didn't make Leadville enough of a puzzle, then you have the bike setup problem. And if you've watched any of my Leadville videos in the past, you have heard my rant on this already. Leadville is considered a mountain bike race because at the time it was started, gravel bikes wouldn't exist for another 15 years. In reality, Leadville is not quite mountain bike terrain with mostly wide double track and gravel roads, but there are also too many rough sections to make a normal gravel bike the right call. For this reason, 2 years ago, I did something radical here. I put drop handlebars on my mountain bike, not to be different or to have something to talk about on my YouTube channel, as many of my fellow racers assumed, but to actually attempt to go faster. Bro, give me a break. This is literally your 5th video talking about drop bar mountain bikes. That's more than GCN and Alexi Vermeulen combined. Now, I was not the first rider to ride drop bars at Leadville. Riders like Travis Brown and Corey Wallace had tried it, but it never went mainstream, not even close. But still, to me, it made a lot of sense. I didn't just make this decision haphazardly either. I tried it on every section of the course and even did calculations to take into account the aero savings at altitude and came up with a 6-minute savings for the entire course. And in 2023, the first year that I used the drop bars here, I did go faster by about 20 minutes over the previous year. Of course, I was also fitter and the conditions were perfect, so it's hard to say how much the bars helped. The following year, which would have been last year, the winner of the race, Keegan Swenson, and also Russell Finsterwald also put drop bars on their mountain bike. Now, I made a big deal about the watt savings and the time savings from running the drop bars here, but for most people, that doesn't mean a whole lot. They just care about what the winner of the race is doing, because whatever the winner did must be the fastest. It's not logical, especially in this scenario, because Keegan Swenson is so dominant that he could probably win on a tricycle, but it's just the way the world works. When I saw that Keegan had embraced drop bars, I knew that everything would change at Leadville. And sure enough, this year, probably half the pro field in both the men's and women's race were on drop bars. Yep, Leadville has officially become the unholy burial ground for the traditional mountain bike, and I couldn't be happier about it. But on top of this, the fact that so many pros went to drop bars and there are still holdouts on traditional flat bars meant that we kind of have a little bit of a natural experiment on our hands. If drop bars are in fact faster by roughly 6 minutes, then riders who choose drop bars should on average go faster this year compared to the previous year, especially compared with their flat bar counterparts. Stick around to the end of the video because I am going to be comparing last year's times to this year's times for the flat bar and drop bar riders to try to see if drop bars were actually an advantage and come up with a winner for this flat bar versus drop bar debate at Leadville, at least this year for the riders that chose it under these conditions. But still, hopefully it'll be enough to get the internet trolls all riled up. Don't take the bait. If we all just comment boring under this video, then maybe he'll finally stop talking about this. Let's get to how the race actually played out though, because I suppose this is still a race report video and I shouldn't get too sidetracked with my own soapboxes and high horses. Now, even when I'm in my best shape, pacing at Leadville is critical. Blowing up catastrophically is extremely common at altitude and your ability to recover from hard efforts is compromised. I normally set a power and or heart rate target and stick to it religiously despite what everyone is doing around me. And in the past, this has resulted in me being behind at the top of the first climb and then catching riders as they blow up throughout the race. This year, my strategy was no different. In fact, I would argue that it only makes more sense to follow a rigid pacing strategy when you're not in your best shape. Given my lack of volume over the last month, I was very worried about blowing up, so I did keep it pretty conservative. I settled on trying to hold 270 watts up the climbs, which is a sea level equivalent of 340 watts. Yes, riding at this altitude does make that big of a difference to your power, and yes, using the sea level equivalent when talking about your Leadville power does make you seem much more impressive and is better on the ego. Last year, the number that I chose for the climbs was 300 watts, but there was no way that I was holding that in my current form, and to be honest, last year this number was probably too high for me as well. Sticking to a conservative number like this, of course, means that you get dropped almost immediately on the first climb because people are terrible about pacing themselves for a long bike race, and I am not immune to this. I have cracked 2 out of the 3 times that I've done Leadville. This meant that I was cresting the first climb after doing 273 watts average for a little over 23 minutes up it in 51st place out of 65 riders in the men's pro field. Look, I know that even despite getting hit by a truck, this back of the pack Leadville story seems a little bit desperate right now, and you're totally justified in wondering why I even bothered making a YouTube video about this race at this point. Yeah, we were all thinking it. For pretty much all your race videos, actually. But I was starting to pick riders off after the first climb with another 23-minute effort at 280 watts to the top of the second climb. And then by the time I got to the bottom of the powerline descent at 25 miles in, I had moved up to 43rd place. Unfortunately, as I hit this flat section on the course where drafting matters a lot, I caught Canadian hitter from the Poutine Mafia, Alexis Cartier, who was actually on a gravel bike. Again, this is a bad idea. There's a reason why I caught him at the bottom of the descent. That being said, it was a good bike for this particular section of the course, and to be honest, I let him do most of the pulling here, averaging just 210 watts for over an hour before hitting the bottom of the longest climb of the day and the halfway point of the race, Columbine. Going up Columbine, I actually flipped my Wahoo to the maps page so that I couldn't look at my power, and I more so just tried to ride at a pace that felt manageable and that kept my breathing under control. This isn't something that I would normally do, but pacing really matters for the first two climbs, and then for the remainder of the race, I was just focused on not blowing up. Going up Columbine, I managed 254 watts for a little over an hour, which, as I'm obligated to remind you, is a sea level equivalent of nearly 320 watts. And I was catching riders as I climbed, which boosted my spirits immensely. By the time I got to the top, I was now up to 33rd place. Okay, I don't know how to talk about this. This is very new and uncharted territory for me on this channel, but we're going to attempt to talk about emotions and feelings here for a minute. Let's see how it goes. At the top of Columbine, you come out of the trees onto this open field at the top of a mountain that you just spent an hour climbing, and it may just be the most beautiful scenery that I or most people will race a bike in, period. It's hard to enjoy it because you can hardly breathe, and obviously you aren't stopping to take in the view or take a picture mid-race, but even in this hypoxic state, it is a sight to behold. As I made the turnaround at the top of Columbine, something happened that has never happened in my life before. I started getting choked up and tears started welling up in my eyes, not from sadness or pain, but from happiness. At least I thought that's what it was, but I'll get to that in a minute. I quickly gathered myself because I had a long descent in front of me and over 50 miles left to race, but this caught me completely off guard. I have never cried tears of joy in my life before, but then again, I've never been married and I don't have any children, so maybe I just haven't experienced the most joyful parts of life yet, but I digress. Now, I could talk about my power numbers for the rest of the race, but quite frankly, who cares? I didn't even look at my power for the rest of the race. I just kept it on my map screen and pretty much rode on pure emotion. At the bottom of Columbine, I caught an old college racing buddy of mine, Elliot Baring, and again, I was okay to let him do most of the work on the flats, as I knew the chances of blowing up on the power line climb were high. He was happy to do about 80% of the work, and even though I could have gone harder here, my plan was to get to power line, and then at that point, I could throw caution to the wind and go all out to the finish. Again, 2 out of the 3 times that I have done Leadville, I have cracked on Powerline, so this climb has nothing but respect from me. Going up Powerline, Elliot got a small gap on me, but I kept him within sight, and by the bottom of the descent off of Powerline, I had caught him again, and we were working together to catch riders. In this late stage of the race, for the first time all day, I found myself within the top 30 and catching riders by the minute. And every rider that I caught felt like a reassurance and was a massive boost to my confidence. On the final false flat stretch, I felt those emotions bubbling up again. After all was said and done, this was actually going to end up being a pretty decent Leadville. And I didn't expect that at all. In fact, if you had asked me how the race would go 3 days earlier after I had done a pre-ride, I probably would have said it was going to be a rough day and I would have been an hour back from what I was. By the time I hit the finishing straight, I found myself coming to the line solo in 27th place in a time of 6 hours, 49 minutes, and 18 seconds. And out of the Lifetime Grand Prix riders, yes, the eternal curse continues just like nothing ever happened with a 17th place. While this may not seem like much, this result was only 6 places off my finish from last year and only 20 minutes off of last year's time and 25 minutes off of my best. Again, I didn't expect a lot going into this race, but I far exceeded those expectations. But what happened next was probably the least expected. At the finish line, those tears that I was holding back at the top of Columbine and throughout the second half of the race, yeah, I couldn't hold them back anymore. I held it together for probably 5 minutes to say congrats to some of my fellow racers who were at the finish line, and then I saw Treva Anno, who works for Lifetime. She asked me how my race went, and I just immediately started bawling my eyes out in front of her. I don't even know her very well, but maybe it was just the fact that it was a woman instead of one of my male racing peers that I have this need to appear tough and strong around. I don't know. And for better or worse, the feed got footage of it, so here you go. You've been warned.
I've never cried after a race like this. I think sometimes people just, they don't take into account like the emotional part of getting injured like that. After I got hit, not only did I not ride a bike for a month, which is the longest I've ever not ridden a bike in my life, but I couldn't even walk. Like all I did was sit on a couch, and like my couch has like a permanent dent in it from where I just sat there for a month.
Congrats.
Thank you.
You did it. Like you're gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Oh, dude. Oh, dude, I just got some gravel dust in my eye, man. I swear. Who's chopping onions in here? If the top of Columbine was the first tear of joy that I ever shed in my life, then the finish line of Leadville was the first time that I legitimately cried from happiness. At least that's what I thought in the moment. I've had some time to reflect on what I was feeling, and I actually do think that it was trauma from the accident resurfacing. Last year, I had a close friend of mine die after being hit by a car on a bike ride, and this year, 2 local riders to Western North Carolina, where I'm from, were hit and killed on a group ride. One of the riders who narrowly escaped with his life is a friend of mine, and we went to see him the day after the accident, and I don't know if I've ever seen somebody in a worse mental state. And while my accident wasn't nearly as serious, I still think about it all the time. I still train on the road, obviously, because it's my job, and more importantly, it's what I love to do. But I still have PTSD every time a truck passes me too closely. After I got hit, I spent a month doing nothing but sitting on a couch. I couldn't walk, I couldn't exercise, I couldn't even drive a car. When you're used to riding a bike 20 to 30 hours a week, this kind of shift is hard mentally, to say the least. The day of Unbound was probably the hardest day of the entire recovery process. I put on a good face when I popped onto the live stream to give my commentary for about 5 minutes, but truth be told, I didn't even want to watch it. But I also put it into perspective. In the grand scheme of things, sitting on the couch for a month and not being as fit as I'd like to be for the races that I have this season is not the end of the world. A lot of riders were not as lucky as I was. I've personally known riders that weren't as lucky as I was. When I think back on it, I think what I was really feeling at the end of Leadville was relief. Relief that I was able to race again, but more than that, just relief that I was okay and that I was one of the lucky ones. Okay, well, turns out that Dylan Johnson is a human after all, and not just a robot that spits out research articles on creatine and watt losses from running tires that are too narrow. Who would have thought? This seems like a bit of a weird transition, but for those who are curious, my NP for the whole race was 243 and my average power was 212, which is a sea-level equivalent of 306 and 265 respectively, and this is about 20 watts lower than last year. I am genuinely proud of this effort given everything that I went through this summer, but this race was about more than power or heart rate or even tactics. It was about proving that I could race again even if I'm not quite as fit as I used to be just yet. And if I'm being honest, overanalyzing the power numbers from this race seems a little bit inappropriate at this stage of my recovery process. That being said, what is appropriate, and also extremely relevant, is me saying, I told you so. Let me explain. I am, of course, referring to drop bar mountain bikes. 2 years ago, when I first did a drop bar mountain bike at Leadville, there were a lot of skeptics, and many of my fellow pros were among them. Alexi Vermeulen. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just clearing my throat there. Sure, I ended up going faster, but I'm just one rider. The next year, Keegan ended up going slower with the drop bars, and this year he still hasn't beaten his fastest time, which was set with the flat bars. But this year, nearly half the pro field switched to the drop bars, which means we have a much bigger data set to see whether or not drop bars did in fact go faster at Leadville. And so, of course, I took the top 20 men and women from last year and compared their times to this year to see if the ones that chose the drop bars did in fact end up going faster. I excluded riders that DNF'd this year and riders that went way slower this year for a reason that had nothing to do with handlebars, like Howard Grotz, for example. And I also excluded Keegan, Russell, and myself because we chose drop bars last year, so obviously we can't improve by choosing them again this year. When you take the average race time for the flat bar riders and the drop bar converts and compare their 2024 times to their 2025 times, flat bar riders went on average 8 minutes and 27 seconds slower this year compared to their last year times. And this is likely because conditions were not fast this year. It was too dry and the air quality on race day was really bad due to wildfires. In fact, there were points during the race that the AQI hit 150, which undoubtedly affected riders' performances. So, how did the drop bar converts fare? They only went an average of 1 minute and 23 seconds slower than last year, which would seem to indicate that drop bar riders picked up a 7 minute and 4 second advantage on average by choosing the drop bars. Is this perfect science? Absolutely not. There are so many uncontrolled variables that it's not even funny, but it's just a bit of fun to round out an otherwise emotional video. And here's where the I told you so part comes in. Remember at the top of the video what I told you I thought the advantage of running drop bars at Leadville was? That's right, 6 minutes. And the actual difference between flat bar and drop bar riders from last year to this year? 7 minutes. I think I'll end the video there. The fact that this is how this dude cheers himself up after spilling his heart out about nearly getting flattened by a truck is just sad. Thanks for watching. If you want to follow my racing closer, be sure to check me out on Instagram. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, and share it with your cycling friends. I'll see you in the next one.